So JavaScript objects, this, part 2. So we saw the behavior of this in JavaScript. This is bound at runtime, not in compile time. In most cases, this in JavaScript will behave like its bound sibling languages. This is undefined in the global functions in strict mode. So global functions in JavaScript are like static methods in Java. They lack this. The use is not caught at compile time because remember, this is a runtime resolution. So you can resolve it at runtime, even though in the most cases you're not. It'll be undefined. In the demo, we will understand more about the runtime nature of this in JavaScript. That is, how you as a programmer can flexibly define this. So now we're using our script. Global functions become member functions. So we have our object here, no member functions, just two data properties. And then I define a global function, say this too. I also use notice that I'm calling out this here. Okay, so I'll call it here. And then we'll go to say name to, and I'm also using this here, which caused problems at runtime before, but this time it won't, because we're going to add these dynamically to this object. So say name becomes say name to, say age becomes say age to, say this becomes say this to. So we're creating on the fly these members of the O2 object and setting them to function definitions of various kinds. One that will say what the value of this is, one that will say the value of this dot first name, and one that will say this dot age. Let's clear this and refresh the page and find out what happens. So say this undefined, and that's my call. That's my direct global call right here, and that should be unsurprising now, right? Remember, this is undefined for global functions normally. Okay. Now I create this other global function here and this another global function here, but I don't invoke them yet. I don't call them. Instead, I set them as properties to the object O2, and now I run them. And now we see that this is functioning properly here. So at runtime, right, in Java, this would need to be resolved at compile time. Here, we're resolving it dynamically at runtime and saying what this is, essentially this object. And we can see that we're referring to this object. And in fact, when we do say this, we get the object itself, including the functions that we have. Say age, say name, say this. These are the properties of this object. Notice here that also that these global functions can become members of many objects. And at runtime, they'll work. So when I add say this to O3, it runs the same way, except this time when it runs, it'll identify when it says they say this, it expands out here, and we show this type of object here. So for the most part, we've seen that this behaves in a way you'd expect from understanding of other languages. This time we're going to say runtime this problem, and we'll see a problem that comes from the runtime understanding of this. Let's load this script. So I have the script here, object2 set equal to with this property first name and age, and we're setting a function called timeout demo. Let's understand a little bit about what this set timeout does. Set timeout is a browser function, and it wants two parameters. It wants the callback function, that is, it's going to wait for a time and then call this function. And the timeout is specified in the second parameter here in milliseconds. So wait 2 seconds and then call this function. One thing to understand about the nature of this function is that set timeout is asynchronous. So it'll set this, it's not going to wait here, it's going to go on. So it'll run other functions too, including another set timeout, which is slightly different, and we'll look at that in a little bit, what the difference is between this version and this version, but both versions are going to run pretty simultaneously when I hit refresh. All right, we wait a little, and we see after 2 seconds is undefined. Now, look at what we're doing here. This dot first name, and that's what it's saying is undefined. This has to be defined, however, otherwise we'd have a runtime error here, right? You can't dereference an undefined thing. So this is something. And to understand what it is, you need to understand about what the runtime context of this function is then. So set timeout, we've registered this function. When we invoke this function, timeout demo, it gets that registration happens. The running doesn't happen. When the JavaScript runtime runs the function, it runs it in the global context. That is the context of the window object. And that's the context that this is then bound to. Remember, it's runtime bound. And in that context, the window context, first name is undefined. If this was undefined again, we'd have a runtime error here. Now, immediately popping up, because we've already registered the second callback, is this one. After 2 seconds, John. So let's see how that was solved here. So we have a variable that we've called that, and that's pretty conventional for people to do this. Kind of a play on words. Let that equals this. Okay? Then set timeout. Instead of using this, we use that. Well, what happens? This is a special case. JavaScript is monitoring it. It's a runtime definition. So at runtime, this is resolved to the global window. That, on the other hand, is lexically defined. So lexically means it looks for it in the text. So it looks up and it finds that, which we set to this. But when we were in this context, we were in the context of the object when that was set. So that now has access, and it functions just like the this pointer in terms of data member access. So this is one resolution of that problem: to set a local variable inside your inside the function that's going to register a callback, and then references that, and you can, and then therefore it behaves more like the conventional this in that running context. So next time we'll look at the arrow function in JavaScript.